wildlife, what comes to mind? Please don't tell me bushmeat. Please.
Dr. Noja will not be very happy with you if your answer is bushmeat.
Because 1 in 5 people rely on wild species for income and food, while 2.4 billion people depend on wood, fuel, or cooking. So March.
Still.
Yeah. Today, we observed the world, no, okay, that was yesterday, right?
That was yesterday,
Yes.
That was yesterday. We observed the World Wildlife Day, WWD, a UN International Day celebrating the world's wild animals and plants and their contributions to our livelihoods and the health of Mother Earth. Let's have this conversation this morning with Dr. Joseph Onoja, who is Director General, Nigerian Conservation Foundation. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Thank you very much for having me.
We're going to Abuja shortly, but let's start with that thing. Do you think people understand wildlife beyond bushmeat?
Yeah, people do. They do. I would say they do because we all know apart from the consumptive value of the animals that we have around us, people also know their intrinsic value and their use value as well, because they play a very significant role for us. It's just that these days we have a lot of selfishness and greed, which has led to where we are today. Because even in those days, hunters used to have hunters' code, and I'm sure you've had hunting seasons. And even if it's the riverine communities, you have fishing seasons. And that's because there are times whereby these wild animals breed and you allow them time to be able to breed. Because if you harvest them during their breeding season, the tendency is that you harvest pregnant females and young ones. But when you have open season for hunting, that's when you allow for the matured ones, the ones that can be taken out. So in the olden times, people have already been practicing sustainable harvesting, and that is one of their ways of doing it. So it's not really a new phenomenon. But it came to a time whereby our greed superseded our reasoning in terms of trying to protect these animals, and then we went harvesting them such that, in fact, there was one time I was in Liberia, and they used to have, the hunters used to have a code, but after the war, they now everybody became a hunter, and they had this saying that no baby on target, that is, you clear anything you see, anything at all that you see, probably be it pregnant female, as long as an animal. So people lost that code, that sense of responsibility to our animals. People lose them, and then we started killing. And we now drove the population of these wild animals to the level that they become endangered. And because of that, that is why now it became a problem for us to start thinking about animals who are endangered, and then we'll start talking about bushmeat. If not, before now, the only source of protein for local communities and communities living around protected areas or wild areas are this what we call bushmeat. That's their only source of protein. But we got to a point whereby their harvest is no longer sustainable. And down the line, it's exposing their communities to extinction, because they will not have that source if we continue at this rate.
But bushmeat refers to a whole load of
Yes, that means different
flesh from animals.
Yes, so yeah, so the different flesh from animals and different species as well, and then we just harvest them without recourse to what is their status and the role they play.
Do people eat pangolins?
Yeah, people eat pangolins. Yeah.
Okay.
Pangolins.
Okay. We've since been joined by Ms. Folusho Ajayi, Team Lead for Wildlife, UNODC. Good morning.
Hello, good morning.
First of all, tell us what UNODC means.
It's the United Nations Office for Drugs and Crime.
Office for?
Drugs and crime.
Drugs and crime. Okay, thank you. Now, we heard that a total of 1,613 tons of pangolin scales meant for export was seized by customs in February. Pangolin scales. So these people take the scales for export and then eats the flesh. Is that correct?
Well, we don't really know what they use the flesh for. Some people eat the flesh, as Joseph mentioned. Pangolins is consumed as bushmeat in Nigeria locally. But for the various reasons, we don't really have the data on what they use the flesh for after they've harvested the scales of these pangolins.
Okay. Pangolins are now on the list of endangered species, am I correct? What other animals are on that list? Is it a long list, by the way? Endangered species in Nigeria. Sorry? Can you hear me?
Sorry, I lost you. Yeah.
Endangered species in Nigeria. Can you give us some of the major ones?
Well, definitely pangolins is on that list. We also have the African grey parrot, the elephants. We also have the rhino. Rhinos were local to indigenous to Nigeria, but we're seeing the population dwindling. Those are a few of some of the major endangered species in Nigeria.
Now, madam, speaking to your core area of core competence, going by the office from which you came, what are the systems that you see being in place to forestall this risk that we're at of these animals that you said are on the endangered species list?
Okay. For a while, we grappled with weak institutions on the part of the relevant national agencies with a mandate to combat wildlife and forest crime and protect these endangered species. Weak in the sense that there wasn't real capacity for them to fulfill their mandate. Also, porous borders. Nigeria is blessed with having one of the more advanced border infrastructure in the African region. And of course, criminals will take advantage where they see loopholes in the system. But one thing that we've noticed, that we've seen in the past couple of years, is that Nigeria is actually rising up to its responsibilities. One important tool which was developed and launched last year was the first national strategy to combat wildlife and forest crime in Nigeria, 2022 to 2026. Now, this is an important tool for Nigeria to tackle wildlife crime because it charts a roadmap for Nigeria. It sets out certain strategic objectives which Nigeria needs to implement to eradicate or drastically reduce wildlife crime. So that's one critical tool that has been developed by Nigeria, and UNODC supported that process. Joseph, I'm happy to see he's in the studio. He was also part of the development of that national strategy.
Well, we understand that the illicit wildlife business is a multi-million naira business.
Yeah.
And at the same time, it's a business that's not supposed to be.
Yep.
Okay, so how do we ensure? Because, I asked about people's understanding beyond bushmeat.
Yeah.
I asked that because this is the idea. At the end of the day, you travel on major highways all over the country, you see people marketing wildlife along the roads and all of that. So in terms of education, in terms of enlightenment, what do people need to know, especially who are in modern Nigeria, that can communicate to rural Nigeria so that they can also be a part of the process of ensuring the preservation of these things? Are people aware of the risks that will come to them if these wildlife go extinct?
All right, so the education, there are different approaches to all of this. Number one is enforcement. The other part is education. The other part is for closely linked to education is enforcement of the laws. of the extant laws. And then we have the education closely linked to that is the awareness. People need to be aware and be aware. And also you have collaboration. So when I talk about education, yeah, there's need for enlightenment, and that's why a day like the World Wildlife Day was set aside, so that people will know the importance of this wildlife. So you don't just see them as, because sometimes as humans we have these egoistic tendencies to think that everything, the world is around us. We need to see ourselves as part of it. The world's in the balance, and if we tamper with that balance, it will eventually affect us first, because we are the most vulnerable of all the wildlife, because they are at home in the environment. For instance, if it's raining now, when you see baboons or you see birds, they just cover themselves and they're at home with it. But if we're exposed to such things, so just elements, we can easily fall sick and even die. So we are most vulnerable. So we need to be aware of that. And once we are aware of that, then we need to be aware of the importance that these wildlife play in their environment and how it affects us. Now we talk about enforcement, on the other hand, is for us also to, the laws to be enforced as it should be. And that's why Felicia talked about the laws, the wildlife and forest crime strategy that was developed. These are some of the things that some of the instruments that are supposed to be used to be able to empower the agencies whose capacity are those to be able to make that happen. Yeah. Now, you see, I'm relating it because we cannot talk about awareness alone, because even if people are aware of it, there will still be defiance.
That's the thing.
Yes.
Okay, so, but let's at least see how deep-seated, how deep-rooted the awareness goes. In rural Nigeria, what do they know about these things?
Well, I think sometimes we tend to underrate the knowledge of these rural communities because they have local knowledge. And that is why I talked about how they have been doing these things even before now. Yeah. But greed has come on board. And that is where also these things, we have to do it on one hand with the laws as well, the extant laws that make sure that criminalizes all of these things. So when you talk to these local communities, they know, because they are the ones involved in it. When you talk to a hunter, for instance, and you ask him, how long have you seen such and such an animal? He will tell you that, yeah, it's been quite some time. So they know that these things is happening, yeah, even though some of them are still very much defiant and say, oh, God will continue to provide. Exactly. But they know, empirical evidence shows that these things are dwindling.
Yes, I know, but do they know the implications or the risk of those things going extinct? That's the question I'm asking.
Yes, on one, yeah, they know. Because as I said, they are
no more food.
Yeah, exactly. So you don't need anybody to tell you that, oh, before you can just walk 2 kilometers behind your house and you're able to get an animal and come and cook for your family. But these days now you spend 4 days in the forest before you come back. And sometimes you come back with a very small, maybe grass cutter instead of an antelope. So they know these things, but we'll continue to create more and more awareness. No, awareness cannot, it's not enough. Yeah. We'll continue to push as much as we can.
Okay. Ms. Ajayi, why is it that the consumption of meats from wild animals has increased over the years? More and more people are eating meat from wild animals. Why is that?
Well, I wouldn't say that the consumption of bush meat or wild meat has necessarily increased over the years. In fact, what we're seeing in the illegal wildlife trade is not so much consumption for killing of these endangered species for consumption. It's mainly for export.
Trade.
We're seeing these endangered species being exploited for exports to other countries and other continents. And so the real focus and where the real problem isn't so much on consumption, because you can do something about consumption. If it was mainly only consumption, you can ensure that consumption is sustainable by ensuring that, putting measures in place to ensure that as people kill these animals for consumption, it's replaced. But where we're seeing the real problem is in the illegal trafficking and the illegal exploitation of these animals for exploitation to larger markets where these species are really quite lucrative. So that really is where the focus really is at the moment, and that's why awareness is extremely important. And like Joseph mentioned, increasing the awareness of the communities also where these species are being exploited from, helping them to understand how it affects them, how it affects their well-being, how it takes away from their biodiversity, is something that is really important. So that's something that is really quite critical. Awareness is extremely critical. And that's why we celebrate World Wildlife Day every year. We also have International Day of Forest. We celebrated World Pangolin Day a couple of weeks ago. So awareness is extremely important. So just to say, the consumption for people eating it in their homes isn't so much of a problem as much as the exploitation of these animals for export.
Okay. How much cooperation is coming from the Customs Service in this regard?
Could you repeat that? I only heard the later part. You mentioned cooperation.
How much cooperation is coming from the Customs Service in helping to curb the export?
Service really must be commended. In the large-scale seizures we've seen over the past few years, the Nigerian Customs Service has really been front and center of these seizures, and that's also largely because of their presence at these ports. A lot of the seizures are done at the seaports, also seizures on land. So they've really been front and center of the seizures done in Nigeria, and they really must be commended. Of course, there's always room for improvement, ensuring that they're working collaboratively with all the other agencies, such as the National Environmental Standards and Regulations Enforcement Agency, Nigeria, which has an enforcement mandate, working with others like the National Park Service, working with the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission, because there's a corruption angle to wildlife trafficking, working with the NFIU, Interpol, and all the other bodies. There's always room for improvement, and that's one of the things that UNODC is seeking to ensure that there's collaboration between these agencies so that Nigeria has a more cohesive response to tackling wildlife crime.
So what's the focus this year of this year's World Wildlife Day?
It's about building partnerships, and as Folusho rightly pointed out, it's not something that an agency or an organization can do alone. We must come together to be able to build that partnership, and we saw that very clearly when we're developing the strategy on the combating forest and wildlife, forest crime and the wildlife, because UNODC led that process, and we're able to make that happen. So we must all come together to be able to make that happen. And as Felicia was talking about the export component of wildlife, because it is a multi-billion dollar crime. And it cuts across, it's international. And that is where the consumptive part of the bushmeat is even a smaller part of it. And that's why I say greed came in, because, before they would just go and pick a little, and only during harvest time, and they make that happen. But because they need so much to be able to make tons, to be able to export, and that is that's what happens. And for the pangolin, the meat is even one of the most less valuable things among all of it, because now pangolin is the most is the most traded in mammal species that we know about. And then we talk about elephant tusk. You want to kill a whole elephant that has lived 30 to 60 years to develop the tusk, and you just pick that tusk alone, and that's what you are. That's what you're exporting. And then you talk about even for timber as well. Some of the timber that are endangered that has been exported illegally and so on. And then the government does not get the. That's for the timber. The government does get the revenue that's supposed to accrue to them, and that is where the World Wildlife Day comes in, because it's stemming in from CITES, which is the convention, the UN Convention on International Trade on Endangered Species of Flora and Fauna, because we recognize that there's some form of trade that should happen with this because of the value that they provide. But there are endangered species that are regulated, that this trade should not be, we should not have trade on some of these species.
Dr. Onoja, the Conservation Foundation has been among those who are really undertaking awareness about all these things. Yeah. And you have been on our program several times to talk about all this. How much success are you seeing from all the work that the conservation is, and agencies such as Ms. Ajayi's? How much results are you achieving from all of that?
Yeah, so I must say that we are making some progress, but howbeit slow. We we're hoping to see a faster adoption of these messages by the populace, and especially now that is kind of twinned with climate change, because we have biodiversity loss and climate change issues all coming together, because they are two sides of the same coin, and then people are beginning to see the practical effect of some of these things. So people are beginning to imbibe that message. But for Nigeria, I must say, it's slow. Partly because of the greed, and then because when we start talking, oh, how do you want people to survive? Oh, people depend on these animals to feed. But there are other alternatives, and that's why we tried. And it has to do with behavior as well. And then moving people from one behavior to another, is a very challenging thing. So some will tell them that, oh, if I don't eat bushmeat, I don't feel like eating anything, and things like that. And sometimes the annoying, the disappointing, and the depressing part of it all is that the hunters who are involved in this don't get as much value from what they do. You find out that the middlemen and the people in the market are eventually the ones who even get much more value. And then the local communities have lost it twice, because they have lost the intrinsic value of those wildlife to their community and the services they provide in these communities. And also they've lost it in terms of even the monetary value, because they're not getting as much value for these animals as they should have ordinarily gotten.
Which is the question that I was asking you the other time about the impact. I mean, if these wildlife are supposed to contribute anything to the environment, are the locals aware? But we'll come to that hopefully before the end of today. But let me ask you, Mr. Jai, Dr. Onaja talked about partnerships as the focus of this year's conversation around the World Wildlife Day. What kind of partnerships are we looking at? I know government has a role, but even then, I mean, we look at the local government level, the state government level, the federal government level, and international partnerships such as yours. How about private sector participation or private sector partnerships, adoption of some wildlife areas and all of that? What kind of partnerships really are we looking at?
The partnerships covers all the areas you've mentioned. So partnerships between the national agencies, partnerships with civil society organizations and non-governmental organizations, regional partnership, inter-regional partnership, partnerships across board, really, partnerships with private organizations as well. Private organizations can decide to take on board wildlife conservation as some of their CSR initiatives. So really, any kind of partnership is what's welcome, and that's what's being celebrated. And I have to say that we're seeing Nigeria at this time also strengthening its partnerships. Recently, under the leadership of the Federal Ministry of Environment, the Wildlife Enforcement Task Force was inaugurated, and this is a body made up of several national agencies with an enforcement mandate. So we are seeing a culture of the partnership between these agencies, and also working with civil society organizations like Joseph's organization, the Nigerian Conservation Foundation, growing in recent years. But what we also need to step up is inter-regional and regional partnerships. Wildlife crime is usually transnational. It's not limited to Nigeria. For instance, quite a few of the pangolin scales that have been seized are not from pangolins in Nigeria. We're seeing a transshipment of pangolins and illegal wildlife products being shipped from the West and Central African region using Nigeria's border ports. So partnerships across board is really what's the focus of this year's World Wildlife Day, and strengthening those partnerships for effective enforcement and conservation of these endangered species.
I go back to the question of structures that I asked you earlier, Mr. Jai. Do we have structures to support that partnership? I want to assume that there are some partnerships that have existed from now. I'm aware, for instance, that the NLNG has adopted a particular forest reserve, Finima Nature Park, for instance. So for other corporates or governments, do you think we have the structures to bear those partnerships sustainably?
Yes, to an extent we have those structures, especially when you're talking about private organizations being involved in conservation. But one key structure that is quite lacking is the legal framework. We need to strengthen the legal framework in particular. There was an interesting case which was celebrated because it was one of the first convictions in a long time, or in September last year, when a foreign national was convicted for trafficking 200 kilograms of pangolin scales. However, he was convicted to sentenced to 3 months imprisonment.
Only.
So we see there's a weakness in the laws, and where sometimes the sentencing doesn't match, the crime, for 200 kilograms of pangolin scales, and you get 3 months on sentencing. That's like a slap on the wrist, go home and, sin no more. But that's not sustainable because that doesn't provide a deterrent effect. So one key structure that's missing is the legal framework. I know that the Ministry of Environment is working with several partners to work with the National Assembly to strengthen Nigeria's laws. If we can get it right and elevate wildlife crime to a serious crime with attendant sentencing that provides a deterrent effect, I think that's one key structure that, if we get that right, we'll see a downwards trend in illegal wildlife trafficking trends.
Dr. Naja.
We have to start winding down now. Yeah. So I want us to close with your advice to Nigerians who cannot live without bushmeat and those who are in the business of trading hides and skins internationally, of trading pangolin scales and whatever else they trade in that are worth all these billions of naira that I'm looking at. Because we hear that the haul that was that the customs found last year, February last year, was worth 10 billion naira.
Yeah.
It's not small money.
It is. I mean, it's not. And that's to show you that the scale at which this happens.
The business is,
yeah,
yes.
The
scale of the business.
I know some of these illegal things move together. It goes with money laundering, it goes with drugs, and it goes with illegal wildlife trade as well.
Yes.
So that is why people who are involved in it, as Felicia rightly pointed out, strengthening the law is something. So the people who are the criminals who are involved in this, the law will soon catch up with them. Because as she said, the partnership is working at strengthening the law. The Federal Ministry of Environment is leading that, so that with other partners leading that, to be able to ensure that we have a wildlife law that bites. And when that happens, then we'll see we'll see that reducing. And for those who are involved in eating bushmeat and things like that, we should look at the health implication even to ourselves. We should look at the depriving the environment of the intrinsic value or the functionality of this wildlife, the role that they play in keeping all of us healthy. Because it's not just for one person, it's for the whole community, it's for the community, for Nigeria, and for the globe. So we should look at it from that angle, and it's very important we do that.
Okay. Mr. Ajayi, your final word?
Well, same as I will re-echo Joseph's statement. It's important that we're looking at it holistically and not just thinking in a myopic way. We need to understand how wildlife crime affects us all, how it deprives us of the rich biodiversity. Nigeria is so blessed with fantastic biodiversity. So the unsustainable exploitation actually will affect us. It's important that we're protecting this. Every single creature has its role to play in the ecosystem. Yes. So it's not proper that we see some of them go extinct. For instance, pangolins, they're referred to as the guardians of the forest because they play such an important role in protecting the forest from termites and all of that. So it's important that we work collaboratively. We put aside our selfish interests and protect the rich ecosystem that we've been blessed with. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Ms. Felicia Ajayi, Team Lead for Wildlife, UNODC, who joined us from our studio in Abuja. And we had with us in Lagos, Dr. Joseph Onoja, Director General, Nigerian Conservation Foundation. Thank you both for coming to tell us about World Wildlife Day 2023.
Thank you very much for having me.
When we come back, you have teenagers at home. I'm sure they're just...
gentle. Very, very gentle. We'll be right back. We'll be right back.